Hey everybody. Well, welcome to week two. Okay, so hopefully I won't have any technical issues today. This computer, it's an old computer. I've had some video issues. I had to been teaching other class that's supposed to be in person, and the camera went off, so I had to redo it. Anyway, so this week we actually get a little bit more involved in the actual writing process. Learn a little bit more about, I guess you could say, the more specifics of it. Okay. And of course, I also gave you a couple chapters to read. Important note: a couple of you have written to me, and I'll just say this off the top. Um, just make sure that you watch the lecture videos, because I had a few people write to me and say that they didn't understand why something about the assignments in the book and blah blah blah. And I said, well, first of all, here's the thing. Okay, the book is just for reading. Okay, don't do the assignments in the book. Like it says in the syllabus, and like I said in the lectures, and I'll say it now, the only assignments you get are the ones that are going to be listed on Canvas, and I will announce those. So, and they'll be listed under assignments. So right now, so far, what you'll have due on Monday, I'm recording this on Sunday, is you'll have due that profile assignment, the third person assignment that I asked you guys to do, third person voice, writing about yourself, emphasizing what's unique. Okay. And again, no workbook. Please do not purchase that. You do need the book to read it. That's it. Okay. All right. So let's go. I'll actually go into shared screen right now. All right. And since it's an old computer, I'm dealing with the pinwheel of death. All right. So here we go. Here's Canvas. Okay. And like I said, all the reading assignments are posted on here. You could really read these almost at your own leisure, but you should really keep up. Again, the reading, why do we do it? Well, we do the reading, even though you're not tested on it, because it supplements what I talk about. So, this is what you have to do. I mean, as you can see, chapters 1 and 2. All right. Third person profile of yourself. Again, that's what's due on Monday. Okay. But I'm going to have something else that's going to be due a week from Monday, and I will talk about that in a bit. Okay. All right. So again, this is really kind of the intro to. This is the real intro to actually news writing. Let's go to the book, which is also available online. It's available online through this thing called Chegg.com. So Journalism Today. Okay. So what this does is it talks a lot about the merging of the two worlds, how basically journalism become digitalized. If you eventually teach or take digital media with me, we'll talk more specifically about that and how essentially, really, like, journalism is really, it was very slow to kind of wrapping its arms around the whole idea of like moving from what they call a dead tree paper to a digitalized computer, and then ultimately iPhone, etc., and everything else. But isn't that great? Anyway, New York Times was actually one of the first places to go to actually really kind of like acclimate itself well to it. It has like all different components. Again, if you take digital media, we do things like video and photography. We don't do that in this class. So just really kind of presenting itself, in a way that actually like is easy to read, not hard to understand. You can see even like the way they kind of arrange like the headlines, so they don't bump against each other, so you're not confused. It's all supposed to meant to keep everything simple. Keep it simple. Okay. All right. So let's move on here into just chapter 1. Okay, because I asked you guys to read chapter 2, chapter 1 and 2, 1 and 2. Types of news. Okay, we talk about that a bit. I mean, there's like entertainment, there's community news, there's national news. The place I worked for before was actually more community news patch. Now it's actually made it more like business news, insurance. Okay, this actually, it's interesting. Actually shows you what people really like are interested in. This actually is interesting because like these were actually when I worked at Patch, we actually had essentially a website that actually would keep track of the number of people we had on the website each time. And I always thought that was a bit of a double-edged sword because it would encourage clickbait, basically encourage clickbait, by the way, is a term that's used for stories that are meant to kind of like get you to click, but don't necessarily have any substance. Okay. Um, probably the most popular stories were the weather and traffic, but weather especially. And you think about it, I mean, like, with all the stories that are done in the world, you know, think about what's really important to people, and what's important to people is like whether they're gonna have a job and whether they can get out in the day, out in the morning, whether it's the school or the job. Okay. And right now, like when we have certain things like going on, like snow and stuff like that, that's important to people. And that's why I kept saying, like, basically in that very first assignment you have, the profile assignment, emphasize what's unique. Now, snow may not sound unique, but it is. Okay. When you think about it, like in recent years, it only happens seems to maybe like 2 or 3 times a year. Last year it happened more, but it doesn't happen that often. You know, we've had a few winters where it happens like every weekend or whatever, but so many times like it doesn't, and it happens maybe like twice a month or something like that. That's actually pretty unique, and when that happens, it changes everything. Okay, it if you have kids that go to school, they might not go to school that day. Again, means that you have to actually go shovel your walk, that sort of thing, shovel your driveway to get out, especially if it's deep, right? It affects your driving, things like that. Those things just don't happen every day. Okay. So that's why it's important to emphasize the unique, because the unique basically, that's why I say, like, when they say, it's an awful saying, but if it bleeds, it leads. Bad news may be like, people say like, oh, the news people focus on bad news, blah, blah, blah. But there is a reason for that, is that's because the good news usually means that things haven't really changed, and it is important to write about good news, but the bad things are usually more important to people because they lead to big change. Okay. And that's unique. Okay. Um, okay. So, I mean, a lot of this in this first chapter is essentially the introduction to things. Yes, the different things that the media covers, and basically how they apply to different skills you must have. I mean, it's almost like a dartboard. You're not expected to actually know things before you actually go into a story or something like that. But when you report on so many different topics, it is almost like a dartboard, right? And these are the skills that you really need to have in order to really kind of like, understand things no matter what the topic. Okay, whether it's insurance like I do now, or it's traffic or weather, business, COVID, whatever. Okay, it's good to be like well read a bit, having like a background in culture, civics, knowing things that are going on, knowing about how money is spent. Okay. Judgment is an important thing, because that's actually, your judgment really kind of helps you determine like what's a story and what isn't. Okay. Media ethics, we kind of get more into that because we actually apply morality and ethics to the ideas that you actually come up with. Okay. Obviously it's important to be a storyteller. Okay. But it's also important to be, more like I've said before, it's more important to be a reporter, somebody who actually has an eye for things, somebody who knows how to pick things off. Okay. And know what and will know what matters to people. Okay. We've talked a bit about the AP style book and like why we do that. These are some of the terms. As you can say, lead is actually spelled in 2 different ways. You'll see me spell it this way. Okay, that's again usually the first paragraph of a story. It says, it identifies what the story is, encapsulates why the story is worthwhile, is often the first sentence that summarizes the who, what, where, why, when, and how. And we'll get into that in a bit. Okay, you don't have to know all this stuff. Yeah, so we cut down the word paragraph to graph. You don't have to worry about date lines or even bylines in this class. I just worry about like how you write the story, really. Copy editing is a term for basically having your story edited. And this is actually shows you some of the slug as a term is actually used usually like to help identify a story on the computer system. And again, we ignore these assignments at the end here. Okay. So chapter 1's pretty quick, as you can see. It's all very introductory. Now we have chapter 2, which gets more into the specifics about what a good news reporter needs to find and identify in terms of a news story and a better improve their judgment. Okay, here's a couple of things to look for: timeliness. Okay. Okay, so here's an important thing to know about the news. Okay. And actually, it's funny, I didn't really know this until like maybe mid-career, like actually that this actually stood for this. But the news is actually, you might not know this, the plural of new. That goes to the whole unique thing. Okay. Basically, news reports what's new. So that's actually where the term comes from. And that's probably, other than being accurate, other than being focused and clear, obviously, basically in determining and creating a story, and basically, and you have to come up with your own ideas nowadays. I mean, it's really, ideas will be assigned to you, but it's really like a self-starting profession. So you have to really kind of like be the one. An editor really doesn't. An editor, what really, a good editor is somebody who's considers a good reporter is somebody they're never going to see usually until it's like story time. Okay, until they actually get the story, because they want them out there doing the job, right? And they will also want them out there to deliver the ideas, because the editor is already busy and everything, basically like reviewing that story, come up with his or her own ideas, and editing that story so that it makes sense, whatever. Okay. So one of the things to take again in consideration is timeliness. Okay. So basically, again, you want something that basically is happening like within the most recent time available. Okay, no matter what the topic. And that's interesting because that's something you might have come across in your profile story is, and this is actually on a little whiteboard here, is that you have to identify what's unique. And probably some of you probably did stuff like, what essentially is unique about me. Well, one thing I'm probably going to talk to you about is, one thing I'm definitely going to talk to you about is when you're going to talk about something that's unique about you, it may be something that happened like a while ago, maybe like 10 years ago or something like that. Maybe you got injured in a car accident. I know it's awful to say this, but okay. But what I'm going to be saying to you in this class is that every story really needs to be brought up to date, because again, news is the plural of new. So if you were injured in a car accident, let's say at age, I hate to say 10, and a big, what I want to know is what's going on now, if that's like the biggest thing that's ever happened to you. Okay. And how would I want to know about that? How has that impacted you? Or how is that still impacting you, I should say? Okay. Okay. What sort of an impact did it have on your life? All right. That brings it, because here's the thing. I mean, is that may have been something that happened like people read newspapers want to know what's going on. They want to know, that's why they read them. They want to know what's going on around now. And if you write about something that happened like 10 years ago, one of the first questions I'm going to be asking is like, is the person still around? Is the person still living here? Is the person, I mean, I'm going to say living, but we'll get morbid, but you never know. Is the person like, I don't know, their person ever leave the hospital, that sort of thing. Okay. So the people ask those questions, they always want to, I mean, you see it right now. I see these posts on Facebook. It's almost like newsy in itself. I've seen these people saying like, me, the 10-year challenge or something like that. Me in 2012, now in 2022. Do I look the same, basically? Okay. This is the kind of sort of thing where actually, and that's where I need to get into the who, what, where, how, why, when. Basically, like when you think of timeliness, which is probably the most essential judgment tool to have for a news story. That's essentially, again, how you identify a story is the timeliness and how you identify an idea. And that basically is something that comes in your lead. And one of the first questions always is answered, and I think I brought this up last week, is what is the story about? Why do I care? Okay. So first questions are typically answered in a story are what and why. Okay. Because that essentially is the spine of a story, is who, what, where, why, when. What, where, why, and when. These are the questions that you need to basically answer throughout your story, not just in the lead. You try to answer those questions as much as possible in the lead, but the lead is just usually like one sentence, usually not too long. What you want to do is you want to like try to answer those questions as much as possible up here, but then the rest of the story in each graph tries to continue to answer those questions, or answer those questions that you couldn't get to up here. Okay. And those questions always start with who, what, where, why, when. Okay. Who, I mean, if you're talking about a person, obviously that's going to be answered in the first question, the first paragraph. Okay. But then you're going to continue to talk about who throughout the story if it's a story about a person. Okay. And I meant to say also how. Okay. So who, what, and why are really like the first questions are really answered in the story. In each paragraph, I mean, you might repeat these questions, throughout the story, paragraph by paragraph by paragraph. But, this is what presents a whole well-rounded story, is basically staying focused and answering these questions, okay, throughout the story, okay? Okay, so let's go back to where we were. All right. All right. Proximity. That's like the idea of being local. Okay. That's actually something we dealt with a lot of patch. Obviously, there's a big deal that the big thing that happens, whether it's like a big hurricane or, like a Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. We have people like that. Obviously those are people who make like international or national news, stuff like that. But the other day there was like this big story about I think it was a gas explosion, or maybe it was electrical or oil plant fire in New Jersey. And obviously people in California wouldn't care so much about that, unless, sometimes it elevates in importance. And I have to say, when maybe there's people who are hurt, I hate to say that, but obviously it matters more to people in New Jersey because it's obviously people don't want to know about the tragedy, but they do want to know about the tragedy. They want to know if anybody was hurt, that sort of thing. But they also want to know is the sort of thing that, actually, I hate to say it, but impacts traffic. It will impact the air I breathe, things like that. So, obviously local angles matter, okay, to people, okay? Unusualness, again, uniqueness. The idea that this is a story that maybe that's as similar in nature to other stories, but there's something about it that makes it different, okay? And that's why I said, when you write about somebody else, let's say a person in your, I'm going to ask you guys to write about people, by the way, other people, not just yourself this time. That's your next assignment. You want to write about maybe one of the things is that person's a Rutgers student, but they have a job that makes them busy, like a lot of Rutgers students, but maybe there's something about that job that makes them busier than other students, or makes it their lives more difficult than other students. See what I'm saying? So basically, there's maybe something that basically kind of separates that person from another person, even though they might have similar lives. There's one thing that kind of separates it from another person, okay? Obviously conflict, hate to get too negative, but, people have different points of view. It makes a well-rounded story. You see this pop up at meetings, where people decide on taxes and things that people impact their lives. If you see this a lot now in the U.S. government, it's conflict entirely. We have a 50-50 Senate. So yeah, so obviously those types of sorts of things, because they actually conflict is what kind of leads to maybe development. Okay. It's what helps develop stories, develop things and turn into things. And maybe there's a good outcome and a lot of times there's a bad outcome. Okay. All right. And then, yeah, here we go. Again, they actually reemphasize the who, what, where, how, why, when, who is involved, cares, is affected, needs to be included, has a stake in the, they're talking about maybe a story that, maybe a story involves public debate. Okay. What happened are the course consequences, blah, blah, blah. When did this happen? It's obviously important because that deals with the timeliness of the issue. Where did this happen? The only time maybe they discover something from a World War II general or something like that was left behind or something like that. And that will make news, but what's news is not necessarily what the World War II general left behind or did, or maybe something happened in Germany, but what was discovered now, it was the fact that it was discovered now, all right. That's actually what makes it timely. Okay. It talks about objectivity. Okay. So obviously we try to be flies on the wall. Okay. That's why we write in third person only. Okay. We don't actually insert ourselves in the story. That's a big point to make. Okay. I've had people who kind of start off and will start inserting themselves in the story. I've had people ask the questions, can I interview myself? Well, I only do that in the first non-graded assignment, okay? The rest of the way with our graded assignments, we actually do real stories, okay? So, you know, we obviously, what we try to do is we try to stay, like I said, a fly on the wall. We don't involve ourselves in stories because that actually could change the course of the story. And that shows that you have a bias, okay? You want to basically be able to stay as separate from the story as possible, even if it's something like I've actually like written stories about I'm a big baseball fan, big Met fan, written stories about the Mets, you know. I've had to like keep my distance from that sort of thing, you know. And if you're a Met fan, actually, you have no choice but to be objective because they stink most of the time. But anyway, so you know, but you can't really like insert yourself in the story and basically talk about how much you've loved the team since, in my case, 1973. Okay, you have to basically talk about them and write about them as though they're just something separate and totally disconnected from you. Okay, if they make a bad decision, you have to write about it. Okay, no matter how much you love the team, you have to write about it. Okay. Talks about what's not newsworthy. I mean, this is really the judgment call. It really kind of gets into obviously sensationalizing, you know, the clickbait stuff, the stuff that like, you know, kind of goes beyond, you know, like what it really it's about just really trying to get the facts. It's interesting because you have so much that's going on right now with you know, what's happened with the government in recent years and everything. And like, there's been a lot of talk about how like the previous president, I don't care where you stand. And I know we could probably say the same about some of the stuff Biden's done, but Trump basically like lied a lot. Okay. So, you know, the question was like, should the news media should be repeating these lies? Well, news media's argument there was a conundrum because, you know, it's the president. You have to talk about what the president says, but you really have to also be kind of objective too. So you just can't print a falsehood without maybe some sort of like reaction or some sort of like fact checker to kind of balance things out. Okay. So objectivity really is about, you know, trying to achieve balance. Okay. And balance, you know, brings us to what Bob Woodward said is like the most obtainable version of the truth. And this is, we always try to treat our objective as, you know, objectivity is actually trying to get to the truth as close as possible. Actually, journalists rarely get to the absolute truth. I mean, if something's decided, like, you know, like of Afghanistan last year, how many of us really knew what was going on behind the scenes there, and basically trying to decide like what happened there when, you know, and I know there's debate about how Afghanistan has gone, but you know, it did not present itself well the way it was going. But how do we know, like, really, like, other than, you know, because we weren't in the rooms where Biden and his team were making decisions. How do we really know what happened? What we try to do is we try to seek the most obtainable version of the truth. And that means like one of the things you try to do in that is you try to seek balance. You try to seek maybe people who have both sides of both opinions on it. You know, people who are pro on what or in favor of the way Biden handled things, or people who are against, or even in between. I don't know how Biden handled things. Okay. You try to get like, you know, I know this is probably like where you basically have to deal with things like, and we don't use anonymous sources in my class. Okay. We'll talk about that. But this is actually where the use of like anonymous sources helps because there's people who don't want to put their names on the record. So, you know, this is actually where maybe you try to get, if you see something like a source close to Biden or a source close to the White House, will say this. Okay. And, you know, that's where basically you deal with a situation like, yeah, you try to get as close to maybe the truth as possible by trying to find maybe a source who is as close to that room as possible where decisions were being made. Okay. So that's what you try to do is you try to seek that most obtainable version of the truth. Okay. Rumors. Okay. Obviously you don't repeat rumors. I know you see stuff like that, you know, in certain tabloid newspaper, stuff like that. But again, like you try to get to the most obtainable fact, the most obtainable version of the truth as possible. And rumors don't really get you there. It's just kind of like a lazy way of basically kind of guessing, you know. Maybe there's a nugget of truth there, but you know, but if it's only just a hunch and there's no substance behind it, there's no source behind it, then it's just a rumor. Okay. There's talk about this. We don't really get so much into this, but like obviously there's issues. Different news organizations have like um, basically make decisions on things like how they cover like things like sexual assault. Do they actually like print the names of the people involved? Things like that. We don't really get into that in this class. I mean, this is more just about really just straight fundamental journalism. Okay, those are the types of decisions, again, as they're discussed in media ethics. I was supposed to teach that class this semester, by the way, but only 2 people signed up, so here we are. So the importance of accuracy. Errors affect the public's perception of the media and ultimately the media's credibility with the public. And that is actually the bottom line right there, is the credibility. There's actually a lot of, and we'll get into this a little bit, but there's a lot of like talk about like, people will say like, oh my God, I don't want to get sued if I print something wrong. That's actually not the most important thing about being truthful, being right, or getting your information right. Or, especially like something like a name. Okay. It's about credibility. It's about, because actually it's actually really hard to sue somebody and be successful in a journalism story. So the Supreme Court made it so. Maybe things will change in the future with the Supreme Court, but when you have something like accuracy in names, okay, and like there's been situations I've seen where like names were basically spelled the same way or similarly. Okay, Charles Brown or Charles Brown, oops. They're spelled differently. Oops. Because, and then basically like maybe it's something this person's been charged with murder, and there's happened to be 2 Charles Browns in the same town. And if you don't actually, you don't just assume, because when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me, as they say. Okay. So you don't just assume that Brown is spelled always this way. You always have to make sure that everything is spelled correctly. So whatever source is giving you the information, like the police, make sure they have it spelled correctly, because there could be another Charles Brown in town, and that person could be on your news site, basically charged with murder. And that actually has led to actually successful libel suits. Okay, where somebody basically found himself on the internet forever, and basically, basically with that idea, with the and people have this idea, they'll see on a face like, oh my God, this guy I graduated with, so there you have it. All right, so that's that was the 2 chapters in the book. Let's just go back to the shared screen again and actually look at what we have next. Okay. So next actually chapters you'll be reading are actually chapters 7, 8, 9. Those actually deal with more like the actual writing end of things, more specifics on the writing end of things. What I gave you basically today was the more general writing end of things. And let's look at the news story. And again, like when I say like, they identify the who, what, where, why, when, how, basically that's actually what resembles essentially a conversation. Whenever you want to get information, I go to the basics here. Okay. I mean, what's like one of the typical things that people talk about, maybe like your age or even my age, who's dating who, right? That's actually usually like a good juicy story. I know we got a lot going on with COVID, and maybe that sounds a little kind of like small, but yeah, I know. Here we go with this. Well, actually, storage begins to relent as more states pass their peak. Actually, that sounds like good news. Let's call that up. So you want to basically like, tell people this information. Hey, maybe things will get better. Kind of like that's actually like, hey, guess who's dating who? That's actually basically how a news story works. It works like very conversationally. Okay. Even if it deals with like serious topics like this. Okay. Now, again, the New York Times, again, is very kind of like a little bit long-winded in their writing and that sort of thing, but whatever. But basically, they still get to the heart of the matter. They still keep things simple. They write in a straight active voice, and they write in a third-person voice as objective. And as I've talked to you, I talk about this in digital media again. You see, see how they write their stories. They don't, their stories are not rambles. They don't go on and on and on and on and on like in a long paragraph. Like maybe a textbook would. Okay. This textbook doesn't really necessarily do that. Okay. But you see their paragraphs are like usually kind of a little bit longer and longer winded in a textbook. Okay. But in a news story, they're shorter. I mean, it looks maybe the same size, but because this is actually expanded view, but they're shorter. Okay. And this is just one sentence right here. And basically, again, it answers the what, so, basically, actually another technique that's used to identify the story is tell me what happened. Okay, well, this is what happens. Okay, new coronavirus cases have started to fall nationally, signaling the new coronavirus cases have started to fall nationally, signaling that the Omicron fueled spike that has affected tens of millions of Americas, packed hospitals, and shattered records has finally begun to relent. Very simple. Okay, cases have fallen, and the spike has begun to relent. Okay, very direct and straightforward. Okay, so what that identified is like what happened. Okay, and it hasn't actually gotten so much into the why should I care yet, but I mean it's pretty self-explanatory, right? Because this has basically affected all of our lives. Okay, so let's see what they get into. Each paragraph essentially answers the who, what, where, how, why, when. So let's see what this one does. More and more cases have passed the peak. And what they do is it essentially takes the lead and essentially breaks it down to smaller details, because you guys still got those questions and you still need answers. And you want people to say, like, reader will typically say, prove it to me, show me the numbers. Are you fake news? So more and more states have passed the peak in new cases in recent days. We said that already. As glimmers of progress have spread throughout the handful of states. Through Friday, the country was averaging 720,000 cases a day, about 827,000 last week. Well, I guess the question that they've done here is how? How has it improved? Okay, so that's the first question. His answer is right here. Okay, from 807,000 to 720,000 a day, averaging 1 week. Okay, so that paragraph answers the how. Okay. There may be another paragraph that answers the how, but let's see what happens. Even as hopeful data points emerge, the threat has by no means passed. The United States continues to identify far more infections a day than any prior surge. In some states, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and that's okay. So, they're trying to balance the story here, saying that it's still deadly. It's still something you should worry about. I guess this is the why should I care paragraph. Okay. That's answering that. You should care because there's still a deadly disease out there. Okay. But you should also care that deadly disease is going down. So that helps provide context. Okay. But following a month of extraordinary rates of case growth, block long lines at testing centers and military deployments to bolster understaffed ICUs, declining new case tallies offered a sense of relief to virus weary Americans. I think that continues to answer the why should I care question, especially in the Northeast and the upper Midwest, where the trends are most encouraging. After another round of masking up or hunkering down, some are considering that what life might look like if continues to prove. That's actually kind of like, well, what's next kind of question. Why, what does that mean now? Or does that, or how is that going to help things? How is that going to make things better? Especially after this wave, the level of exhaustion in New York City cannot be exaggerated. Okay. In states where new cases have started to fall, the declines have been so far and so swift and steep, largely mirroring the rapid ascents that began in late December. Those patterns have this actually go back to the how has it gotten better question. So it's getting a little more specific. It kind of continues to break down things. Okay, it also talks about how deaths have declined, that sort of thing. I think so. All right. With a profile story, I don't think the New York Times actually has maybe another profile. Let's see here. Olympians face a daunting Britain. Abrupt ending for. Let's look at Aaron Rodgers, our buddy from the Green Bay Packers. Oh, he lost. I'm sorry. What up there, poor baby. Sorry, I'm a Giant fan. This is how it all ended for Aaron Rodgers on Saturday night. A football fluttering between the uprights, men in Scarlet Parkas scampering onto the field, snowfall is falling. This is actually a very creative lead, I guess. Basically talking about things are just bad for Aaron Rodgers right now. I mean, he's making millions of dollars. Shouldn't be that bad, right? But so this is a story about Aaron Rodgers and basically his time of defeat. And basically now he's faced a situation whether he should retire or not. Now, again, this is all about Aaron Rodgers now. Okay. But Aaron Rodgers has accomplished. I'm not particularly a fan of the guy, but he has accomplished a hell of a lot in his career. He won a Super Bowl 10 years ago, so 11 years ago, right? So basically, he's probably might. I find this incredible after what he did this season, but might win the MVP this year. So I think that's the second one in a row for him. So basically, you have a situation where this guy accomplished a hell of a lot, but what's new here? I mean, we could talk about maybe the greatest thing ever happened to him, most unique thing ever happened to him was Super Bowl, but that was 11 years ago. What's new now? Well, Aaron Rodgers has now gone 11 years without winning a Super Bowl. And for a guy who's accomplished as much as he has, that's actually viewed as a bit of a disappointment. A guy whose statistics rival, if not better, those of Tom Brady, okay, who in that span of time since Aaron Rodgers last won the Super Bowl has won 4, okay? He lost last year to Tom Brady, okay? So, yeah, there's something to be said about that. So basically it's about Rodgers now and how Rodgers is dealing with that and what's next for Rodgers. So you talk about profiles, that's what it's about. It's about what's new. And what's new with Aaron Rodgers that he lost. Not that he won the Super Bowl in, I think it was 2011, right? I always remember it's the one before the Giants. But the fact that he has failed recently, okay, on this level. Okay. All right, so that is again basically some real basics about journalism and what we'll get more into specifics about how to write and that sort of thing. And of course, as I grade your papers, we'll be doing that too. Okay, let's actually go back to Canvas again. I guess sometimes I like to kind of cut away from the sharing. Okay. Actually, I just want to make sure I got everything on my list right here. Yes, lead, ID and angle. Go to the chapters, simple writing, supposed to text, absolutely. Okay. So actually, what I have to do is, because I haven't posted this yet, I want to confuse people. Again, it's Sunday. I'll post it on Monday, but this is going to be your next assignment. And right now I have it in my teaching mode in unpublished mode. First assignment, spring 2021, profile of someone you know. Now, again, when I used to teach this class, unfortunately, but whatever, it's just this class in person. I would have people interview their neighbor, a person in class, that sort of thing, just to get to know them, that sort of thing. We can't do that right now. You guys are working from wherever. So what I'm going to ask you guys to do is actually do what you did this past week, but now actually write an objective story to be graded, okay, on somebody It could be anybody. This is actually where I really kind of differ and I kind of break some journalism rules here, because given our situation, I mean, what are we going to do? But I allow you to interview anybody. I mean, normally you wouldn't do things because there's a bias, okay? You wouldn't do things like interview members of your family, okay? But I allow that to happen for this assignment because some people are just stuck at home and can't really do much, or maybe you're a little bit afraid of actually doing things, interacting with people, stuff like that. So anybody, interview anybody. I just want one person and I want you to focus on that person, okay? Actually looking around, there's something here. Okay, anyway. So please interview somebody can be a family member, okay? Yes, it's true. And typically I'm going to be asking for news stories that are 500 to 800 words in length. And if that's on a Microsoft Word doc, and I need a Microsoft Word doc, by the way, please, I know every time I get at least 2 or 3 people to send PDFs, please don't do that. Please send a Microsoft Word doc, okay? And again, that's uploaded to the actual site here, okay? Please keep to 500, 800 words and focus on what's unique about the person, what's new. Okay, so again, if it's something happened 10 years ago, we need an update. We need something that basically what is, it's not just something that happened that was important 10 years ago, but how did that, why would they even bring that up as an important thing in their life? How does that impact them still to this day? Okay. Again, please refer to the video lecture, which is what this is, and the guide, reading assignments for guidance. Please write in a news story format that should follow this outline, okay? And this is a very basic outline. I'll get more specific outlines as we go along. Again, what is the story about? Why should we care? That's the lead, okay? And then the next paragraph, 1 or 2 sentences, what is the story about? More depth and details. So that's where you start to break down the story into smaller details, like they did with the Aaron Rodgers story. Okay. Same thing again. And the one thing you need to do is really need to stay focused on the same topic. You need to pick out that one interesting thing that's important about them. And then each paragraph needs to answer the who, what, where, why, when, not just about the person, but about the specific topic. Okay. So you have to stay focused, because if you go in all different directions, what you end up having is you have a story that lacks depth, because you're going all different directions. You're not explaining things. You're not providing the depth. You're not answering all the questions about what makes that person unique. Okay. So a story needs to have depth in order to be readable. You want people to read past the first paragraph. Okay. So that's where you have to stay focused. Remember I said accuracy, clarity, and focus is important. Okay. This is, those of you who know Steve Miller, he talks about the string theory. Okay. And that's where basically this is like a news story. A news story basically has to stay straight as a string. Okay. Where it stays on one topic all times. If you go on all different topics, you know how like with an apple cord, it gets, when it gets all tangled up, it gets like hard. Well, not right now, but it's actually sometimes hard to kind of like, untangle. Well, that's basically what a news story becomes when you'll go in all different directions. It becomes something that's hard to untangle. Okay. So you really need to just stay on one topic and answer the who, what, where, why, when, and how. Okay. All right, so that's really it, guys. And I appreciate you listening. Please, I hope you saw this video on time. And that's it. And I will be posting that assignment on Monday morning, and I'll be posting this video, and I'll be letting you know about it. Thanks very much, guys. And let me know if you have any questions, okay? Thanks. And I will also try to get back that feedback on your profile assignments ASAP. Thanks.